Our second speaker today is Ms. Gugulethu Mkandla from Engage South Africa. Gugu is the facilitator coordinator and project management support for Engage South Africa. She is a psychology honors graduate and a qualified mindfulness practitioner who is passionate about education, social change, and creating safe spaces for healthy dialogue. Gugu is a 2019 International Youth Action Net Fellow and the co-founder of a soft skills development program. As an active member of her own community, she hopes to continue working with organizations to promote active civic engagement, mental health, and empower young people to create impactful social change. Thank you, Gugu, for joining us today.
No, thank you so much, Vicky. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. I think before I go into the youth perspectives that we've seen at MyVoice and in Engage South Africa, I'd like to just take you through who Engage South Africa is and what MyVoice program is all about. So in the next slide, we have some stats from the International Youth Foundation's 2017 Global Youth Wellbeing Index. So the first stat is 90% of youth globally consider inequality a major concern. And the following two are 92% of youth in sub-Saharan Africa are very concerned about corruption. 83% of youth in South Africa consider that the government does not care about them. So what we're seeing here is that youth are really concerned about social political issues, but they're feeling a strong disconnect from social and political decision making. Now, in the next slide is our response to these statistics, which is MyVoice, which is a leadership and civic engagement, civic education for youth in South Africa. So with the MyVoice program, we want to promote critical thinking skills, public speaking skills, debating, civic education, voter education. And we've worked with about 700 learners thus far. And we use different modalities. It's usually an 8-week course. But we normally, depending on the group that we're working with, be it high school learners who we work with most of the time, or youth leaders from communities, university students, we adapt the course to suit the demographic. And in our next slide, I'll be taking you guys through. So these are just a few icons, colorful. So the MyVoice program content. So I felt it important to share with you what the program consists of, because this also ties into some of the youth perspectives I'll be sharing later on in the presentation. So we felt it important that in the program, we explore self, because once a person can identify with themselves, reflect on themselves, can improve their interaction with others, and therefore improve their interaction with society at large. So what you'll see next are just some of the sessions that we go through. So exploring identities and self, understanding stereotypes, single stories and othering, leadership and leadership styles, tools for effective dialogue and debate, understanding human rights and state forms, practicing democracy and election, system thinking and mapping, channels of participation in democracy, and sustainable development goals. Now into crux of the presentation. So how we collect our data is through qualitative and quantitative. So our qualitative data consists of creative task assessments. So at the end of each course, be it the workshop or the 8 weeks, we ask our learners to do a creative task, which is normally a reflective task where they reflect on the course, the impact it's had on how they think, act, and feel. And we also get feedback from our facilitators at the end of each session and at the end of the workshop or the 8 weeks. So we ask them to take note of any quotes, any statements that stand out for them, and we collect those and take them into our reporting to help support some of the quantitative data that we collect through post-assessments at the end of the program. So this is just an example of some of the results that we received in 2019 and 2020. So in the icons below, you'll see a percentage of learners who indicated an increase and positive development in each of the 6 critical skills promoted by MyVoice. Okay, if you just click next, there we go. So those are some of our results from 2019 and 2020. So going into youth perspectives and their perspective on democracy. In our next slide, we'll see a list of the different perspectives we've seen over the years at MyVoice through dialogue and some of the activities that we've explored with our learners. So the first and clearest one is that young people understand and are aware of social and political issues. This is something that comes up from the beginning of the sessions. And we see how this alone affects all the different, how they interact in sessions and some of the, how they participate in some of the sessions. So we also see how the historical political identity is usually unclear. So this is something we notice in the beginning in session 1 when we go through identity. And we're finding that a lot of the time young people either find it difficult to define historical political identity, or they just have no knowledge of it at all for themselves in their spheres. And we see how that also affects what they know about human rights and state forms. So overall, finding that there's a lack of knowledge regarding human rights and state forms. So we'll see in activities such as where they have to create their own countries, when they need to pick what state they'll choose, more times than not, it's either going to be a communist or an authoritarian state. Very few times do they ever pick a democratic state. And when questioned about that, they normally bring up statements like, we just feel like it doesn't work. We've seen it not work. It's messy. So we've noticed how even in building, when they're given the opportunity to build their own countries, they don't feel like they're going to choose democratic state, basically because of their lived experience of a democracy. And that shows up in debates that we have and dialogues that we have that also paint how there's a lack of understanding on democracy and elections. So we're finding that when we have debates, moving debates around elections and the importance of voting, and do you feel that your vote counts in a democracy? A lot of the times young people say, no, we don't. We feel that it's useless to vote, and we feel that our voices aren't being heard, we're not validated, we're not invited to decision-making spaces. So how could we vote for such an old generation that doesn't represent any of our ideals and what we're going through? And we also note that they find it difficult to hold a government accountable, and that comes with the lack of knowledge around channels of participation. So they're aware that there's marches that you can march, perhaps petitions. If they do know that there's local government, but they don't know how to utilize local government. They don't know that you can hold local government accountable. So a lot of the times they'll face concerns, social issues that they're going through in their community. But when it comes to channels of participation, they either don't know enough about them, or they don't know that there's more than just marching. There's more than petitions. You know, there's art for social change. You could start a school group, so many more different avenues. And we're seeing more and more that they're really disappointed in the system. They're disappointed in their political leaders and corruption, and it paints their picture of democracy. They just feel that a democratic state can't really hold leaders accountable, which also then colors that lack of understanding around democracy. And so even when we discussed good leaders, leadership styles, the first few points that come up in discussions is that a good leader needs to be one with integrity and is ethical and can follow the laws and is well informed. And I think that's also colored by their lived experiences, by the leaders that they see in power. And also just the disappointment in the lack of representation in decision-making spaces. And this just makes them feel like they're disconnected from government. So a lot of the time when we talk, when we're debating, and even when we're talking about systemic thinking and channels of participation, a lot of the big things that do come up is just that they feel disconnected from the government. They feel that their voices are not heard, they're not validated, and they would like to be part of the change. They'd like to take action, they just don't know how, and they'd like the tools to be able to better engage. And I think when you go to the next slide, that's where my voice comes in. So what you see here is a few of many quotes from our learners just about the experience with my voice and the importance of programs and the importance of creating spaces, safe spaces for young people to discuss social issues, to engage with themselves, engage with each other so they can better engage with society at large. So my voice is so important. Spaces like today, this webinar, are so important because they validate young people's voices. It's an honor to come into the space and be a representative of the voices and opinions that we work with. So some of those voices being high school learners. And a lot of the time when we're facilitating sessions with high school learners, one big challenge they have is feeling like their voice aren't validated, and yet they form up a significant percentage of the youth cohort. So I do feel that they are an important member of the youth, and that's also a voice that's kind of been disregarded and hasn't been given as much attention, because there are some bright ideas and a lot of energy in this cohort, and it would be such a privilege to have them in spaces like this to voice their opinions, their words, as young people. So yeah, I think in the next slide, how can we support youth perspectives? Definitely by including them in decision-making spaces, creating opportunities where they can have a seat in the room, not just as teenagers, but as university students, the older youth. Everyone deserves a seat at some table where decisions are being made about futures that affect us, and creating more spaces for young people to actively engage with civic education. We found that although they come into sessions feeling disinterested, disheartened, there's space to talk about it, create dialogue, and even with that, it creates changed perspectives around civic engagement, interacting with each other. So I definitely do think that continuous research is needed, especially regarding the different age groups within the youth cohort, because what we're finding is that although they're sharing similar social issues, political issues, there's so many different perspectives. So we're finding that with our young youth, the teenagers, the high school learners that we're working with, they have different perspectives to social issues, political issues, how to engage with that, compared to our older youth who we're working with in university and youth leaders. And I think it would be so important to keep continuous research and hear their voices collectively and invite them into spaces so they can see and hear and learn from each other. And of course, more funding for transformational civic engagement education for young people. Transformational learning has proven to be such a useful tool, especially when it comes to civic engagement, and especially when it comes to working with high school students who most likely have gotten the experience of voting. So we take them through is what voting would look like. So in our voting education sessions, we take them through creating their own parties, designing manifestos, campaigning, and asking each other questions around their manifestos, and keeping each other accountable in those sessions, and actually having a ballot box, going into a voting booth, having that experience, presenting your ID, getting that mark. So giving them that transformational experience and experiential learning to help hold that space for civic engagement. So yeah, thank you for giving me your time today. And our next slide is how you can support us, how you can reach us. We do have a website, Engage SA. We do have a YouTube channel with MyVoice, and we also have monthly newsletters. And of course, in this day and age, social media, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have amazing initiatives being run by young people, and an awesome event in July where they get to showcase some of the initiatives. And we have a youth panel with young people talking about social issues. And yeah, just we're trying to play our part in creating a space where young people can voice their concerns and hopefully grant them the opportunity to meet leaders in communities that can create change and help facilitate change. So thank you.